To the head chairman of the Republican Party, J.R. Romano. We get a chance to talk to him every once in a while. J.R., good morning. How are you?
Morning, Lee. How are you?
We're doing good. So, I religiously listen when I remember to, because it gets sent to me, your podcast, which is great. You do a fantastic job with that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really good. So, continue to do that. And just to start off, where can people listen to that if they don't get it like I get it?
Well, there's you can subscribe on YouTube. It's on iTunes. Any platform that you can get podcast that actually is on.
Okay, good. So people can just go type in your name, and it's that simple, right?
Yep.
Okay, very good. So you reached out to me yesterday. You said, "What are we talking about? When are we going to talk about tariffs?" And I'm like, "Well, that's a strange thing for the chairman of the Republican Party to talk about." So, how do tariffs actually affect you and affect the state of Connecticut?
Well, there's no question, and I think one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this, and I have been talking about this, is that I fully recognize tariffs are a tax on a foreign good, which is going to make prices rise, right? We fully understand that as Republicans. Taxes impact pricing and can be a negative on the economy. What I want your broader audience to understand is what President Trump is doing is using tariffs or taxation in order to punish the Chinese government, who has been a bad actor in global trading and all the things that have impacted us. And he's the first president in a long time that has stood up and said, enough. You're no longer abusing the American farmer. You're no longer going to abuse American families with currency manipulation. Lee, if you want to see something scary and just to get a full picture of how dishonest the Chinese government has been to the U.S. consumer, there's a documentary on Netflix about Chinese honey, or just go and Google it, and that should tell you everything you need to know about how they're operating with their trading partners, and that's one product. That's just one product.
Right. Well,
so the reality is, and what also bothered me was the Democrats, like Joe Courtney, are attacking the idea of the tariff, right? Because they're saying, oh, it's bad for the economy, it's bad for business. You know what bothers me about that? Where was Joe Courtney when the local Democrats were raising taxes on safety equipment? If they recognize that it's bad for the economy to raise taxes on foreign goods, where were they when it came to raising taxes on everyday labor? Well, men and women that are punching the clock every day.
Right.
They said nothing. That's the part that really bothers me. This is a short-term strategy that the president is engaged on. What the Democrats did to Connecticut families is a long-term albatross around our necks.
Right.
I mean, that is what is most frustrating when you listen to these Democrats talk about these tariffs.
All right, but doesn't this actually? I mean, listen, I've always said that we've got to sort of spin it back on the Chinese. Whatever they're doing to us, we need to do to them. And I think the president has tried to employ that. But there are even a lot of people, JR, on the right who disagree with what his tactics are. Why do you think that is? Well,
frankly, it's in my personal opinion, it's fear. Because the idea, and what President Trump recognizes, is the stock market goes up and down. So he's not looking at that. What he knows is how the Chinese government has been treating the American businessman, the American family, and the American farmer. And he's not going to tolerate it anymore. These tariffs are a short-term, and it's volatile, don't get me wrong, I understand that, but it's a short-term tactic to get long-term renegotiation, to bring them to the table and hold them accountable for the mistreatment of all of your listeners. And I go back to anyone listening, just Google Chinese honey. It should scare the crap out of you.
Well, break that down. You said it a couple of times. What exactly is happening with Chinese honey? We got a little time.
So what they're doing is they're creating a synthetic honey, and then they're shipping so much of it that it crashed U.S. prices, that to the point where the United States government had to ban it. There were scientists in the U.S. that basically said there aren't enough honeybees in China to create the amount of honey that they're pumping into the United States.
Right.
So what they did after the U.S. banned Chinese honey, they started to doctor shipping labels, ship it to like Malaysia, and then send it into the United States that way. And if this is a communist country, the government knows what's going on.
Right. Okay.
So that's the type of things that we've been dealing with. Not just with that's one, and I keep reminding people it's one product.
Okay.
And the UK recently just banned Chinese honey too, because they're doing the same thing.
So everyone talks about free trade, free trade, free trade. What people don't understand, and maybe you can explain this to everybody, is that we're the only ones that really were employing free trade. Whenever we sent something someplace else, not our allies necessarily, but whenever we sent if you sent a Ford truck to China, it got hammered with all kinds of different taxes and tariffs, correct?
And currency manipulation.
Right. So can you explain that to everybody, how that works in reverse, and why it's not such a bad idea for us to do the same thing back to them?
So what they were making it, particularly in China, impossible for American companies to compete with local businesses. In China, in particular, and I think and I'm sure a listener could fact check this, but in order to do business in China as an American company, you could not do it as a standalone company. You had to turn over your intellectual property. You had to turn over everything to a Chinese company. And lo and behold, what would happen is a Chinese company would then start replicating whatever your service was, whatever it was, as a competitor, and wouldn't have to deal with some of the tariffs and taxations that were being forced upon you as a foreign entity. So, I mean, I can't. This is the first president who's had the courage to stand up and say enough, and that is these tariffs are a short-term tactic. And I just want to remind the listeners, when Joe Courtney and all these Democrats start complaining about tariffs, remind them it's a tax on a foreign good. Where was their outrage when the Democrats in this state, like May Flexer, for example, decided to tax safety equipment or tax Little League,
right?
For Christ's sake,
right.
Little League.
No, you're right. J.R. Romano, again, the chairman of the Republican Party, with us this morning, talking a little bit about tariffs. And since you mentioned a couple different times what's going on here in the state as far as the Democrats go, let's switch really quick to, unless there's something else you want to throw out there about tariffs.
No, I wanted all your listeners to at least be able to, argue the Republican perspective on why this is beneficial long term to the United States.
All right, what do you think is the time frame? Though there's got to be a time frame that you think. Oh, maybe there's not a time frame. Maybe they don't. Maybe Trump doesn't have an end game with this as far as how long it's going to go. How long do you think though that this sort of trade war can continue?
Well, look, as much as the Democrats are rooting for a recession, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. In China, however, the economy is that they've asked to come back to the negotiation table because it's working, and that's the point. It is that he's brought them back to the negotiation table to protect American businessmen, American farmers, and American families, and that's what this president's doing.
All right. Why do you think there are so many people pushing back, even folks that are supposedly on his side, even some economists who don't like this whole package?
Well, as Republican, we hate taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think from that perspective, it's not necessarily something that Republicans would be traditionally known for, to push tariffs on this, and I think there's a fear of what the retaliation would be. But I think this president recognizes the power of the U.S. consumer and the U.S. economy, and he's willing to take these challenges on to protect his people. And that is something that a lot of these economists and theorists and political strategists, they're not thinking in that regard.
Right.
But this president does.
All right, J.R. Romano with us. By the way, if you want to call in and you hear something J.R. says and it kind of piques your imagination, you certainly can. 860-464-9490, 631-317-1949. We'll keep them for a few more minutes, talk about what's going on here in the state of Connecticut. Today is primary day, right?
Yes, it is.
And apparently, according to the reports, maybe we'll get 15, 16, 28, maybe 25% turnout. Probably not 25. But these municipal primaries, what do you think is going to happen here? What's your look on it? Well,
a lot of times primaries are a product of what's happening locally. So I'm hoping that, particularly for the Republican primaries, that everyone comes together regardless of the outcome to make sure that we continue to elect local Republicans to run our towns responsibly. I mean, that's my biggest hope as party chairman, is once all the dust settles, that everyone comes together, because it's a short window before the general.
Right. All right, moving from that to Lamont wants to reboot and maybe once again talk about tolls, a side deal with tolls, maybe a different toll package. What's the word in Hartford as far as tolls go?
Well, as far as the Republicans go, is no.
Right.
I mean, I've gotten. It's almost frustratingly. sometimes when you deal with, there's wealthier areas of the state that don't understand the fervor around stopping tolls because it's like, well, we need it for the infrastructure. And what they fail to recognize, the impact on tolls on, say, a single mom in Norwich who's, a dental hygienist making $55,000, $60,000 a year. The state is going to ask her to pay an additional $800 to $1,200 a year to drive to work.
To go to work.
That would destroy a household where it's a single family income. And we have to continue to tell that story of how that's real dollars out of hardworking Connecticut families' pockets. And we're not going to take it anymore. We're not going to tolerate it.
Now, there was something in the Current this past Sunday that I found interesting about the debate as far as tolls go and how if it doesn't actually happen, which hopefully it won't, they're searching for different revenue streams, maybe increasing gasoline tax or raising sales or income tax.
How about a cut?
Well, that's I was going to ask you. What about we try something different and cut, right? No? Or is that ever talked about?
Or how about this? Senator Austin, who I'm sure she doesn't listen, Lee, specifically stated that the state of Connecticut has diverted money away from the Special Transportation Fund. I mean, for many of us out there, we recognize the Democrats robbed the armored car before it got to the bank and said, we didn't do anything wrong. We didn't rob the bank. But that's kind of how they diverted money. The reality is, since 2012, over $2 billion was taken out of that, was diverted out of that Special Transportation Fund. How about just leaving it alone?
Right.
How about just letting the money that's collected through gas tax and all the means that are supposed to go into the special transportation, let's do that for 5 years and see where we are. And the problem is the Democrats have mismanaged the state so much that they have to raid these funds or divert money away from these special projects in order to meet operating expenses. And that's one of the things where I don't think many people understand. It's not that the special transportation doesn't have money allocated or supposed to be going into it. It just never gets there.
There's actually a surplus now, correct?
Well, see, be careful when you say that, Lee, because, yes, the state of Connecticut has a surplus. However, they're collecting more from us, right? So sometimes Democrats want to use this idea that there's a surplus as though the economy's improving. That's actually not what's happening. They're just collecting more from us.
Right. Okay, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's a substantial amount of money that's accumulated in the rainy day fund, right?
I think it's about average for on a state level, but the problem is that the reason they have to keep that rainy day fund where it is because if it dips or they start to tap into it, their bond rating would be impacted. And as you know, we're in the process of always wanting to borrow money because they can't meet operating expenses. So we're in this catch-22.
I know, but every economist will tell you, everyone, not one will say something different. Every single one will say, okay, if you have a few extra bucks, pay down your debt. Or, pay off what you have to pay off as opposed to certainly don't borrow any more money. But I mean, if we have that money that's sitting in there, wouldn't it be smart to either spend that on these things that?
It's not even close to being enough. I mean, our liabilities are in the billions.
Well, yeah, no, I know that, but I mean, there are certain things that we could start to attack. No.
I mean, I agree with you, but it's literally a drop in a bucket because of what the Democrats have created in terms of things like FLMLA. These long-term liabilities, not to mention what's happening with the pension. It's just we're not even there, and even the surplus in regard is. They're claiming that we have one, maybe, but we carried 100. What was last year's deficit? $300 million.
Right.
Yeah. So again, they've collected more than they thought they would. It doesn't mean that they're operating in the black.
Right. No,
Does that make sense?
No, of course it does. Of course. Let me grab somebody. Somebody actually wants to ask you a question. So let's go out to Dan, who is in Old Lyme. Dan, good morning. You're on with J.R. Romano. Go ahead.
Oh, hey, JR. One, I love what you're doing this morning because you're educating us about issues that the mainstream media, other than Lee, doesn't tell us about and keeps it a secret. So thanks for that. But second,
no problem.
I think I know the answer, but you made a good point about the Democrats complaining about the Chinese tariffs raising prices for everyone and how the state taxes everything to raise prices. The Trump tax cut that raised the paychecks of everybody. Am I correct in assuming that Joe Courtney voted against us getting a pay raise 2-3 years ago?
I'm actually not sure what I'm going to assume he did, but don't hold me to that. I think that was a partisan vote. And I'll be honest with you, the Trump tax cuts, although it benefited us nationally in the economy, our state is in such fiscal crisis that it actually had little to no impact here because of the fact that Hartford pushes down unfunded mandates to our local municipalities, which forces the local municipalities to raise our property taxes. So state and local taxes were no longer allowed to be deducted on a federal level. So in Connecticut, it wasn't a home run like it was in other parts of the country. But I will tell you, because of the stock market, and I know it's volatile right now, but because of the stock market and because of military contracts, Connecticut was able to stave off complete, because we've lost jobs, but because of EB and some of the other things that have been going on from a military standpoint, we've actually added some jobs in those sectors. But Connecticut we are completely flatlined when it comes to our economy. And just the tax cuts benefited its payroll, wages have risen, unemployment's the lowest across the board for every demographic that it's ever been in history. And I mean, one of the funny things is John Larson recently made a joke about how unemployment's down because everyone has 2 jobs. He doesn't even understand how the statistic works. It's not like that. It's one person, whether they have 1 or 2 jobs, they're still employed. So unemployment being this low has everything to do with there's new jobs out there. Jobs are being brought back to this country. It's actually an exciting time, and the Democrats can't stand the fact that our economy is doing well, and so they're literally rooting for recession. They're rooting for your families to struggle to make ends meet, so you turn to them and say, we need a government program. That is their hope for your family. That's how sad it has gotten for the Democratic Party.
Oh, you're totally right. It's awful, and it just proves that their policies don't work. And Trump, who they hate, his policies do work. And down here, we have electric boat. It's because of him, like you said, that there's so many jobs at electric boat because he increased military spending. And I don't think that happened much during Obama's years. That Courtney sort of puts his, they're the same philosophically.
Well, I think Joe's in a tough spot. I would put Joe in a little bit of an old school Democrat kind of mold. But I will tell you what he won't talk about probably is where the Democratic Party currently is. For example, I wonder where Joe Courtney stands on the fact that every presidential candidate talked about banning hamburgers. I wish I was joking. In the presidential debate, Democrats talked about banning hamburgers, banned commercial air travel. All these things. That's their standard bearer. That's going to be their presidential nominee. And so Joe Courtney's trapped in this Democrat. I mean, they're going through some form of metamorphosis into this extreme progressivism. And where when you have the every one of in a what was it like a 4-hour debate on the environment, presidential candidates talk about banning hamburgers.
I think it wasn't that a 7-hour? Or that was the town hall was all about climate change. I don't know if you saw that. That was like 7 or 8 hours long. By the way,
God, it was. And when you listen, it was downright scary. Banning commercial air travel. We're going to take horse and buggy across the country.
Well, not only that, but they're all talking about that. Yet Buttigieg flies private air all the time. These guys are such hypocrites. It's ridiculous.
But this is the communist socialist model. Yeah. Politicians can do what they want. The plebes, the rest of us, we have to follow the rules. They can fly. They get to vacation.
Sure.
They get to go to beautiful locations across the world. Not us. We have to take a boat. Right. That's the mentality of the Democrat Party. That's where socialism leads.
All right, Jared. Listen, I'm out of time. Great stuff as always. One more time, tell everybody if they like what you had to say today, where can they listen to your podcast?
Well, you can go to YouTube, you can go to iTunes, you can go to Spotify. Just look up my name, put in politics. I really appreciate the opportunity, Lee.
All right, Jared, anytime. It's always a pleasure. I'll talk to you down the road.
All right.
All right, buddy. We'll be back.